They told me I was a cold-hearted bastard who chose money over family. My own son spat those words at me 7 years ago before walking out of my life forever. But when desperation brought him crawling back, begging for $500,000 to save his daughter's life, I discovered the real monsters weren't the ones he thought they were. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones sharpening the knife for your back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Marcus Blackwood, and I'm 61 years old. This is the story of how I lost my son, almost lost my granddaughter, and learned that sometimes the only way to save your family is to destroy the parasites feeding off their pain. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October. I know the exact time because I was awake, staring at quarterly reports in my home office, nursing my third cup of coffee. Sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford since building Blackwood Capital into a $2 billion investment firm. The phone's harsh ring cut through the silence like a blade. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers at that hour usually meant bad news or desperate people, and I'd had enough of both to last several lifetimes. But something made me reach for it. "Marcus Blackwood?" The voice on the other end was barely a whisper, cracked and hollow. "Dad?" I froze. 7 years. 7 years since I'd heard that voice. 7 years since Dylan had screamed at me in this very office, calling me a soulless corporate vampire who cared more about profit margins than his own flesh and blood. 7 years since he'd looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're dead to me, old man. Don't ever contact me again." And I hadn't. Pride, stubbornness, and the crushing weight of building an empire had kept me silent through birthdays, holidays, and milestones I'd never know about. Now, here he was, reaching across that chasm of silence. "Dylan?" My voice caught in my throat. "I need your help." The words came out like they were being torn from his soul. "It's Emma. She's dying. Emma, my granddaughter. A little girl I'd only seen in photos Dylan's mother had secretly shared before cancer took her 3 years ago. Photos I'd kept hidden in my desk drawer, looking at them when the office grew too quiet and the weight of my choices pressed down like concrete. "What's wrong with her?" "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Stage 4. The doctors say there's an experimental treatment in Switzerland, but insurance won't cover it. They want $500,000 up front." His voice broke completely. "I've tried everything, Dad. Sold my house, cashed out my retirement, borrowed against everything I own. I'm still $300,000 short." $500,000. For most people, it was a fortune. For me, it was what I spent on a decent weekend yacht. But the number wasn't what stopped me cold. It was the desperation in my son's voice. The same desperation I'd heard in my own father's voice 40 years ago when he'd begged investors to save his failing construction company. "Where are you?" "Seattle Children's Hospital, room 412. "I'll be there in 6 hours." The silence stretched between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. Finally, Dylan spoke again, his voice barely audible. "Thank you." The line went dead, and I sat staring at the phone for a long moment. Then I called my pilot. The flight from Chicago to Seattle felt like the longest 4 hours of my life. I'd made this trip countless times for business, usually buried in documents or conference calls. This time, I staring out the window at the clouds below and wondered if I was about to meet my granddaughter for the first time, just to watch her die. Seattle Children's Hospital was a maze of sterile corridors and hushed conversations. I found room 412 and stood outside for a moment, gathering courage I hadn't needed in boardrooms full of hostile executives. Through the small window, I could see Dylan sitting beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of a pale little girl with no hair and tired eyes that looked far too old for her 7-year-old face. I knocked softly and pushed the door open. Dylan looked up, And for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, before anger and disappointment had carved lines around his eyes. He looked exhausted, thinner than I remembered, wearing clothes that probably had been slept in for days. "Dad." He stood slowly, uncertain. "Dylan." We stared at each other across 7 years of silence. Then my granddaughter's small voice cut through the tension. "Grandpa?" I turned to look at her properly for the first time. Emma was tiny, dwarfed by the hospital bed and medical equipment surrounding her. But her eyes were bright and curious, studying me with an intelligence that reminded me painfully of Dylan at that age. "Hello, sweetheart." I moved closer to the bed, my throat tight. "I'm sorry it took me so long to meet you. Daddy said you build really tall buildings." "I help fund them, yes, but I think you're much more impressive than any building I've ever helped create." She giggled, a sound that seemed impossible in this place of sickness and sorrow. "I can't build anything right now. My hands shake too much." I looked at Dylan, who was watching our interaction with a mixture of hope and wariness. "Tell me about the treatment." We stepped outside while Emma dozed. Dylan pulled out a folder thick with medical documents, research papers, and financial statements. His hands shook slightly as he spread them across a waiting room table. "The treatment is called CAR T-cell therapy, but this is a newer version they're only doing at the Institute for Pediatric Oncology in Zurich. They take her white blood cells, genetically modify them to attack the cancer, then put them back. The success rate for cases like hers is 78%. And without it?" Dylan's jaw tightened. 6 months. Maybe 8 if we're lucky. I studied the documents. Everything looked legitimate, from the hospital letterhead to the detailed treatment protocols. The cost breakdown was itemized down to the last Swiss franc. Transportation, treatment, recovery, follow-up care, it all added up to exactly $500,000. "Her mother?" I asked quietly. "Stephanie died in a car accident 2 years ago." Dylan's voice was flat, emotionless. "Drunk driver. Emma was in the back seat but somehow walked away without a scratch. The leukemia showed up 8 months later." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of all the milestones I'd missed. "I'm sorry. I should have been here." "Yeah, well." Dylan gathered the papers with sharp, angry movements. "You were busy building your empire." The old anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but now it was tempered by desperation and the terrible arithmetic of a dying child. "I'll transfer the money today." Dylan stopped, mid-motion, staring at me. "Just like that?" "Just like that." For a moment, I thought he might cry. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and nodded once. "I'll pay you back, every penny. I don't care how long it takes." "We'll figure that out later. Right now, let's focus on getting Emma well." But even as I said the words, something nagged at me. Maybe it was 40 years of business deals and reading people across conference tables. Maybe it was the practiced way Dylan had laid out those documents, or the fact that he had my private number despite 7 years of no contact. Something felt rehearsed about this moment, like a performance I was meant to applaud rather than analyze. I pushed the feeling aside. This was my granddaughter's life we were talking about. Even if I was being manipulated, even if Dylan was playing some angle I couldn't see yet, Emma was innocent. She deserved every chance at life I could give her. The money transfer took exactly 47 minutes. I called my bank from the hospital parking lot, provided the necessary authorization codes, and watched $500,000 disappear from my account with a few keystrokes. I'd spent more than that on art I'd never looked at twice. Dylan cried when I showed him the confirmation on my phone. Real tears, the kind you can't fake. He hugged me for the first time since he was 12 years old, and for a moment I let myself believe that maybe we could rebuild what we'd lost. "The appointment in Zurich is next week," he said, wiping his eyes. "We fly out Thursday."
"I'll arrange a private jet and accommodations." "Dad, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." I looked back toward the hospital where my granddaughter was fighting for her life. I've missed enough. That night, I stayed at the Fairmont Olympic in downtown Seattle instead of flying back to Chicago. I should have been reviewing acquisition reports or preparing for Thursday's board meeting. Instead, I sat in my hotel room staring at the city lights and thinking about the little girl with bright eyes and a killer's disease running through her veins. I called my assistant and cleared my schedule for the next 2 weeks. Blackwood Capital had survived 40 years. It could survive 2 weeks without me. But Emma might not survive without this treatment, and I'd already failed my family once. I wouldn't do it again. The next morning, I returned to the hospital with coffee and pastries from Pike Place Market. Dylan looked like he hadn't slept, and Emma was awake but tired, picking at a breakfast that looked like colored paste. "Grandpa!" She brightened when she saw me. "Did you bring real food?" I glanced at Dylan, who shrugged. "The doctors say she can have regular food, as long as she keeps it down." I opened the box of pastries, and Emma's eyes went wide. Chocolate croissants! For the next hour, I watched my granddaughter eat actual food and color in a book about princesses. She told me about her stuffed elephant named Mr. Peanuts and how she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She asked if I had any pets, and I found myself promising to get a dog when she got better. "A big one," she said seriously. "Little dogs are mean." Dylan watched us with an expression I couldn't read. Relief, maybe, or suspicion, possibly both. Around noon, a woman arrived who Dylan introduced as Sarah Mitchell, Emma's family caseworker. She was mid-30s, professionally dressed, with the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, extending a manicured hand, "Dylan has told me so much about you. It's wonderful that you're able to help with Emma's treatment." Something about her tone set my teeth on edge, but I shook her hand politely. "Anything for my granddaughter." "Of course. Family is everything." She turned to Dylan. "I've confirmed the appointment with Dr. Brennan in Zurich. Everything is arranged exactly as we discussed." As we discussed. Not as Dylan had arranged, or as the hospital had recommended. As we discussed. I filed that phrase away in the part of my mind that had learned to survive in rooms full of sharks wearing expensive suits. "I should probably get going," Sarah said, after chatting with Emma for a few minutes. "I'll see you before you leave for Switzerland." After she left, I asked Dylan how long he'd been working with her. "About 6 months. She specializes in cases involving experimental treatments and international medical travel. She's been incredible, handling all the paperwork and coordination." "How did you find her?" Dylan paused in the middle of adjusting Emma's blanket. "She found us, actually. After Emma's diagnosis, someone at the hospital recommended her services." Another detail that felt slightly off, like a picture frame hanging crooked on a wall. But again, I pushed the feeling aside. This was my family. I was probably just being paranoid. The next 3 days passed in a blur of medical consultations, travel arrangements, and precious time with Emma. She was stronger than I'd expected, asking endless questions about my business, my travels, and why I lived so far away. "Daddy says you're very important," she told me one afternoon while I helped her work on a puzzle. "I used to think so, but I'm learning that the most important things aren't always the ones that make the most noise." She considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to complex concepts. "Like Mr. Peanuts. He's very quiet, but he's the most important thing in my room." Exactly like Mr. Peanuts. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that matched my mood. I'd arranged for a medical transport jet equipped with everything Emma might need during the flight. Dylan had protested the expense, but I'd overruled him. If we were doing this, we were doing it right. At the airport, Sarah Mitchell appeared again to see us off. She had a briefcase full of documents and spent 20 minutes going over travel procedures with Dylan while I helped Emma get settled in the plane's bedroom. "This is like a flying house," Emma said, bouncing gently on the bed. "Wait until you see the bathroom. It's smaller than your hospital room, but it has a window." As we prepared for takeoff, I noticed Sarah speaking quietly with someone on her phone near the terminal. Something about her posture struck me as odd, but before I could think about it further, Dylan was asking me to help him explain to Emma why her ears might pop during the flight. The trip to Zurich took 11 hours with a refueling stop in Iceland. Emma slept for most of it, curled up against Dylan with Mr. Peanuts clutched in her arms. I spent the time reading medical journals and research papers about CAR-T therapy, trying to understand exactly what my granddaughter would be going through. The Institute for Pediatric Oncology was housed in a modern glass building overlooking Lake Zurich. Dr. Klaus Brennan met us personally, a tall man in his 50s with kind eyes and an English accent that suggested he'd studied at Oxford or Cambridge. "Miss Emma," he said, crouching down to her level, "I understand you're here to let us borrow some of your cells so we can teach them to be better fighters." Emma nodded solemnly. "Will it hurt?" "A little bit, but we'll make sure you're very sleepy during the hard parts. And when you wake up, you'll be that much closer to going home healthy." The consultation lasted 2 hours. Dr. Brennan explained the procedure in detail, reviewed Emma's medical history, and outlined the timeline. The initial cell extraction would happen the next day, followed by a 10-day period while the cells were modified in the lab. Then another procedure to reintroduce the modified cells, followed by observation and recovery. The total timeline is approximately 3 weeks, assuming no complications. "And the success rate?" I asked. "For patients in Emma's condition, we've seen remission in 78% of cases. Of those, 92% remain cancer-free after 5 years. Those were good odds. Better than good. They were the kind of odds I'd built a fortune on. That night, I stayed at the Fairmont Olympic in downtown Zurich, one of Zurich's finest hotels. I'd booked a suite with connecting rooms so Emma could have her own space while staying close to Dylan. After room service dinner and a long bath that Emma declared fancier than home, I tucked my granddaughter into bed, for the first time in my life. "Grandpa?" she said, as I turned off the light. "Yes, sweetheart." "Thank you for helping me get better." "Thank you for letting me." I closed the door softly and found Dylan standing on the suite's balcony, looking out over the lake. The city lights reflected on the dark water like scattered diamonds. "She's an amazing kid," I said, joining him at the railing. "She's everything good about Stephanie and nothing bad about me." Dylan's voice was quiet. "Sometimes I look at her and wonder how I got so lucky." "You're a good father, Dylan, better than I was." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I used to hate you for choosing work over family, but watching Emma fight this disease, seeing how much the treatment costs, I'm starting to understand why you worked so hard. Security isn't just about money, it's about having options when everything falls apart. The money was never the point. The work was just easier than dealing with people. Spreadsheets don't talk back or have feelings you can hurt."
A cold-hearted bastard? A scared man hiding behind success. Dylan looked at me with surprise. It was the most honest I did with anyone in years, maybe decades. "The treatment starts tomorrow," he said finally, "and Emma's going to be fine." I said it with more confidence than I felt. But sometimes you have to speak the future into existence. Sometimes hope is the only currency that matters. The next morning, we arrived at the Institute at 7 a.m. sharp. Emma was nervous, but trying to be brave, clutching Mr. Peanuts and asking questions about everything she saw. The staff was wonderful with her, explaining each step and letting her push buttons and flip switches wherever possible. The initial procedure took 4 hours. Dylan and I sat in a family waiting room that overlooked the lake, drinking coffee that tasted like it cost more per cup than most people made in an hour. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. When Dr. Brennan emerged, he was smiling. Everything went perfectly. Emma's cells are healthy and responded exactly as we hoped. The modification process will take 10 days, and then we'll be ready for the next phase. Emma was groggy but alert when we saw her in recovery. "Did they take the bad cells?" she asked sleepily. "They took some of your good cells to teach them how to fight the bad ones," Dylan explained. "Like sending soldiers to school?" "Exactly like that." That afternoon, while Emma napped in the hotel, I took a walk through Zurich's Old Town. The ancient streets and medieval buildings felt solid and permanent in a way that modern skyscrapers never did. I found myself thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. I'd built a company worth billions, employed thousands of people, and created financial instruments that moved markets. But none of that would matter to Emma. What would matter to her was whether her grandfather had been there when she needed him most. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Mitchell. "Hope everything is going well in Zurich. Let me know if you need anything from this end." I stared at the message for a moment. How had she gotten my personal number?
Dylan must have given it to her, but it still felt presumptuous. I deleted the message without responding. Over the next week, Emma grew stronger every day. The Institute staff encouraged light activity, so we took walks around the lake, visited local museums, and ate entirely too much Swiss chocolate. Emma was fascinated by everything, asking questions about the language, the architecture, and why Swiss people were so quiet on public transportation. "They're thinking important thoughts," I told her as we rode a ferry across Lake Zurich. "What kind of important thoughts?" "Probably wondering why there's a little American girl asking so many questions on their ferry." She giggled and snuggled closer to me on the bench. "Grandpa?" "Yes?" "When I get better, will you come visit me more?" "Every chance I get." "Even if Daddy's still mad at you?" I looked at Dylan, who was taking pictures of the mountains with his phone. "I think your daddy and I are figuring things out." "Good. Families should stick together." Out of the mouths of babes. The second procedure was scheduled for day 11. This time, the modified cells would be reintroduced into Emma's system, where they would hopefully begin their search and destroy mission against the leukemia. Dr. Brennan warned us that the next 72 hours would be critical as Emma's body adjusted to the new cells and potentially fought off the cancer. She may experience fever, fatigue, and nausea. This is normal and actually indicates that the therapy is working. The modified cells are activating her immune system. Emma was braver this time, marching into the procedure room like she was going to battle, which, in a way, she was. The waiting was harder the second time. Dylan paced the family room like a caged animal while I tried to focus on quarterly reports that suddenly seemed completely meaningless. How had I spent 40 years obsessing over profit margins when there were sick children in the world who needed fighting for? 6 hours later, Dr. Brennan found us again. The infusion was successful. Now we wait and see how her body responds. Emma was moved to a private room equipped with monitoring equipment that would track her vital signs and immune response around the clock. She looked tiny connected to all those machines, but her eyes were bright and alert. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" Dylan asked. "Like I have army soldiers in my blood," she said seriously. "I can feel them marching." Dr. Brennan smiled. "That's not actually far from the truth. Your cells are working very hard right now." That night, Emma's fever spiked to 103 degrees. The nurses assured us this was expected, but watching my granddaughter shake with chills while burning up from the inside was one of the hardest things I'd ever experienced. Dylan never left her side, cooling her forehead with damp cloths and singing the same lullaby over and over until she finally fell asleep. I stepped out into the hallway for some air and found myself calling Sarah Mitchell. I'm not sure why. Maybe I needed to talk to someone removed from the immediate crisis? "Marcus," she answered on the first ring. "How is Emma doing?" I filled her in on the procedure and Emma's current condition. Sarah listened with appropriate concern, asking medical questions that seemed surprisingly sophisticated for a caseworker. "I'm sure she'll be fine," Sarah said when I finished. "Children are remarkably resilient, and you're doing everything possible for her. I just wish there was more I could do. You've already done the most important thing. You've given her hope." After I hung up, I realized Sarah hadn't asked about Dylan at all. Every other conversation we'd had, she had inquired about how he was handling things, how he was coping with the stress. This time, her focus had been entirely on Emma's medical condition and my emotional state. Maybe she was just being professional, or maybe something else was going on. I pushed the thought aside and went back to Emma's room. She was sleeping peacefully now, her fever broken, color returning to her cheeks. Dylan had fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand. Looking at them together, I felt something shift inside my chest. This was what mattered. Not board meetings or acquisition reports or profit margins. This, family, connection, love that didn't come with conditions or quarterly performance reviews.
I'd been chasing the wrong things for so long that I'd almost forgotten what the right things looked like. The next morning brought good news. Emma's fever was gone, her appetite was returning, and her blood work showed early signs that the modified cells were doing their job. Dr. Brennan was cautiously optimistic. The next few days will tell us more, but her response so far is exactly what we hope to see. Emma was well enough to sit up and eat real breakfast, which she declared was almost as good as Grandpa's pastries, but not quite. We spent the day playing card games and watching movies on the room's entertainment system. Dylan seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him since arriving in Switzerland. That afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown Chicago number. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Detective Rodriguez with the Chicago Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about a financial fraud investigation." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of investigation?" "We've received information suggesting you may have been the victim of an elaborate medical fraud scheme. Are you currently in Switzerland with family members seeking expensive treatment?" I stepped out of Emma's room and into the hallway. "What are you talking about?" "Sir, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you planning to return to Chicago soon?" "Detective, my granddaughter is fighting cancer. If there's something you need to tell me now." There was a pause. "Mr. Blackwood, we have reason to believe the medical emergency you're responding to may not be what it appears to be. I need you to be very careful about any additional financial transactions until we can meet in person." The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. "Are you saying my granddaughter isn't sick?" "I'm saying we've had similar cases where wealthy individuals were targeted through elaborate medical emergency schemes. Usually family members who had been estranged were brought back into contact specifically for financial exploitation."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "That's impossible. I've seen the medical records. I've met with the doctors." "Medical records can be falsified, Mr. Blackwood, and there are people willing to play any role for the right price." I looked back toward Emma's room, where she was laughing at something Dylan had said. "Detective, I need to call you back." I hung up before he could respond and stood in the hospital corridor, my mind racing. Was it possible? Could Dylan have orchestrated this entire situation to con me out of $500,000? The timing of his call, the way he'd had all the documents ready, Sarah Mitchell appearing out of nowhere to coordinate everything. Even the choice of Switzerland, far enough away that I couldn't easily verify details independently. But Emma was sick. I'd seen her condition with my own eyes, talked to doctors, watched her go through procedures. You can't fake leukemia, could you? I thought about the man who'd built a $2 billion company by reading people in situations others missed. That man would have spotted a con this elaborate from the first phone call. But this wasn't a business deal. This was family. This was emotion and desperation and 7 years of guilt clouding my judgment. I needed to know the truth. That evening, while Dylan went to get dinner and Emma slept, I called Detective Rodriguez back. "I need you to check something for me," I said. "A caseworker named Sarah Mitchell who specializes in international medical travel, and verify the credentials of Dr. Klaus Brennan at the Institute for Pediatric Oncology in Zurich." "Already ahead of you, Mr. Blackwood. Sarah Mitchell is a real person, but she's not a caseworker. She's an actress with credits in independent films and commercials. As for Dr. Brennan and the Institute, they check out completely. They're legitimate." So the doctor and hospital were real, but Sarah was fake, which meant what exactly? "Detective, I need you to understand something. My granddaughter is genuinely sick. I've watched her go through medical procedures. Whatever scam you think is happening, Emma's condition is real." "That may be true, Mr. Blackwood, but real medical conditions can be exploited just as easily as fake ones, sometimes more easily because the emotion is genuine." I closed my eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "For now, nothing that might alert the other parties that we're investigating. Continue with whatever treatment plan is in progress, but don't make any additional financial commitments, and document everything." After I hung up, I sat in the hospital hallway for a long time, watching nurses go about their routines and thinking about trust. I trusted Dylan, despite our estrangement, because he was my son. I trusted Sarah because Dylan trusted her. I trusted the situation because the need felt so urgent and genuine. But 40 years in business had taught me that the most successful cons always contained elements of truth. The key was figuring out which elements were real and which were manipulation. When Dylan returned with dinner, I watched him carefully. He was attentive to Emma, genuinely concerned about her comfort, clearly exhausted by the stress of her illness. Either he was the best actor I'd ever seen, or his love for his daughter was completely real. "How you holding up?" I asked him. "Better now that her fever's broken. Dr. Brennan says the next few days should tell us whether the treatment is working." "And if it doesn't work?" Dylan's face darkened. "It has to work. I can't lose her too." The pain in his voice was raw and genuine. Whatever else was happening, Dylan's fear for Emma was real. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah Mitchell, about her sudden appearance in Dylan's life, about the way she'd coordinated every detail of the trip to Switzerland, about how she'd somehow gotten my personal phone number. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to the hotel's business center. I spent the next 3 hours conducting the kind of background research I should have done weeks ago. What I found made my blood run cold. Sarah Mitchell had indeed worked as an actress, but not in Chicago. She'd been based in Los Angeles until 8 months ago, when she had suddenly relocated to Seattle. Her last known address was in a suburb 30 minutes from Seattle Children's Hospital. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found when I dug deeper into her background. Sarah Mitchell had previously been investigated by the FBI for her involvement in a medical fraud scheme targeting elderly cancer patients in California. The charges had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the pattern was clear. She found vulnerable families dealing with expensive medical crises, inserted herself as a helpful coordinator, and then exploited their desperation for financial gain. Usually, the medical conditions were real. The fraud came in inflated costs, unnecessary procedures, or kickbacks from medical providers. I printed everything I found and returned to my room as the sun was rising over Lake Zurich. Emma was already awake, sitting up in bed and playing with Mr. Peanuts while Dylan dozed in the chair beside her. "Good morning, Grandpa," she whispered. "Did you go for a walk?" "Something like that. How are you feeling?" "Better. My tummy doesn't hurt anymore, and I'm hungry." Those were good signs. According to Dr. Brennan, returning appetite usually indicated that the modified cells were successfully fighting the cancer without causing excessive side effects. "What would you like for breakfast?" "Chocolate croissants." I smiled despite everything. "I think that can be arranged." While Emma ate breakfast and Dylan took a shower, I sat by the window overlooking the lake and tried to make sense of what I'd learned. Sarah was definitely a fraud, but the hospital, the doctors, and Emma's condition were all real. So what was her game? My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah herself. "Thinking of you all. How is Emma doing?" Instead of responding immediately, I called Detective Rodriguez. "I found something," I said, and filled him in on Sarah's background. "That fits the pattern," the detective confirmed. "These people target real medical situations because the emotional vulnerability is authentic. They don't need to fake the crisis, just exploit it." "But how? The money went directly to the hospital. Or did it go to an account that Sarah Mitchell had access to?" I felt sick. "I need to verify the bank routing numbers." "Good idea. And Mr. Blackwood? Be very careful. If Miss Mitchell realizes you're investigating, she might disappear. And if she's been handling the financial arrangements, that could complicate your granddaughter's treatment." After I hung up, I sat in the hospital hallway for a long time, watching nurses go about their routines and thinking about trust. I trusted Dylan, despite our estrangement, because he was my son. I trusted Sarah because Dylan trusted her. I trusted the situation because the need felt so urgent and genuine. But 40 years in business had taught me that the most successful cons always contained elements of truth. The key was figuring out which elements were real and which were manipulation. When Dylan returned with dinner, I watched him carefully. He was attentive to Emma, genuinely concerned about her comfort, clearly exhausted by the stress of her illness. Either he was the best actor I'd ever seen, or his love for his daughter was completely real. "How you holding up?" I asked him. "Better now that her fever's broken. Dr. Brennan says the next few days should tell us whether the treatment is working." "And if it doesn't work?" Dylan's face darkened. "It has to work. I can't lose her too." The pain in his voice was raw and genuine. Whatever else was happening, Dylan's fear for Emma was real. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah Mitchell, about her sudden appearance in Dylan's life, about the way she'd coordinated every detail of the trip to Switzerland, about how she'd somehow gotten my personal phone number. Around 3 a.m. I gave up on sleep and went to the hotel's business center. I spent the next 3 hours conducting the kind of background research I should have done weeks ago. What I found made my blood run cold. Sarah Mitchell had indeed worked as an actress, but not in Chicago. She'd been based in Los Angeles until 8 months ago, when she had suddenly relocated to Seattle. Her last known address was in a suburb 30 minutes from Seattle Children's Hospital. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found when I dug deeper into her background. Sarah Mitchell had previously been investigated by the FBI for her involvement in a medical fraud scheme targeting elderly cancer patients in California. The charges had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the pattern was clear. She found vulnerable families dealing with expensive medical crises, inserted herself as a helpful coordinator, and then exploited their desperation for financial gain. Usually the medical conditions were real. The fraud came in inflated costs, unnecessary procedures, or kickbacks from medical providers. I printed everything I found and returned to my room as the sun was rising over Lake Zurich. Emma was already awake, sitting up in bed and playing with Mr. Peanuts while Dylan dozed in the chair beside her. "Good morning, Grandpa," she whispered. "Did you go for a walk?" "Something like that. How are you feeling?" "Better. My tummy doesn't hurt anymore, and I'm hungry." Those were good signs. According to Dr. Brennan, returning appetite usually indicated that the modified cells were successfully fighting the cancer without causing excessive side effects. "What would you like for breakfast?" "Chocolate croissants." I smiled despite everything. "I think that can be arranged." While Emma ate breakfast and Dylan took a shower, I sat by the window overlooking the lake and tried to make sense of what I'd learned. Sarah was definitely a fraud, but the hospital, the doctors, and Emma's condition were all real. So what was her game? My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah herself. "Thinking of you all. How is Emma doing?" Instead of responding immediately, I called Detective Rodriguez. "I found something," I said, and filled him in on Sarah's background. "That fits the pattern," the detective confirmed. "These people target real medical situations because the emotional vulnerability is authentic."
Let me know if you need any assistance with follow-up arrangements. This time, I responded, "Everything is perfect. Thank you for all your help coordinating this." Her reply came immediately. "My pleasure. There will be some additional costs for extended observation and follow-up care. I'll send details soon." There it was, the additional costs, the extended extraction of money from a grateful grandfather whose granddaughter was recovering from cancer. I forwarded the exchange to Detective Rodriguez with a note, "She's going for more money." His response was immediate. "Perfect. Letter. The more financial fraud we can document, the stronger the case becomes." That evening, Dr. Brennan gave us the news we'd been hoping for. Emma's blood work showed clear signs that the modified cells were successfully attacking the cancer. Her white blood cell count was normalizing, and there were no signs of adverse reactions to the treatment. "I'm cautiously optimistic," Dr. Brennan said. "We'll need to monitor her progress over the next several months, but the initial response is excellent." Emma clapped her hands together. "Does that mean I can go home soon?" "Another week of observation. Then yes, you can go home." Dylan broke down crying right there in the hospital room. 7 months of fear and desperation finally releasing in great, shaking sobs. Emma patted his hand like she was the adult and he was the child. "It's okay, Daddy. The soldier cells won. We can tell them thank you now." That night, we celebrated with room service champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Emma. She insisted on toasting the soldier cells and Grandpa's kindness and Daddy's love. It should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, I sat there knowing that someone was actively stealing from our family's crisis, turning Emma's recovery into a payday. But Sarah Mitchell had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was just another wealthy Mark, too emotional and grateful to ask hard questions. She didn't know that I'd built an empire by being more ruthless than the people trying to cheat me. And she was about to learn exactly what that meant. The next morning, Sarah's additional costs email arrived. Extended observation, $50,000. Specialized follow-up care, $30,000. Transportation and accommodation adjustments, $20,000. $100,000 in additional costs that hadn't been mentioned in any of our previous discussions. I forwarded the email to Detective Rodriguez and then called my lawyer in Chicago. "Jim, I need you to do something for me. I want to buy a small medical consulting company in Los Angeles, the kind of business that provides patient advocacy and treatment coordination services. That's an unusual acquisition for Blackwood Capital. It's not for the company, it's personal." Within 6 hours, my lawyers had identified and made an offer on Mitchell Medical Advocates, a small firm that provided exactly the services Sarah claimed to offer. The current owner was retirement age and eager to sell. By the end of the day, I owned the company. More importantly, I now had access to the industry contacts and databases that would let me trace exactly how Sarah Mitchell operated. What I found was bigger than I'd expected. Sarah hadn't just targeted my family. Over the past 2 years, she'd worked with at least 6 other families dealing with serious medical crises. Each time, she'd positioned herself as a helpful caseworker or patient advocate. Each time, she'd skimmed money from treatment funds or charged for services that were already included in standard care. The total fraud appeared to be well over $2 million. But she'd been careful. She'd never taken enough to bankrupt anyone or cause treatments to be canceled. She'd calculated exactly how much she could steal while still leaving families grateful for her help. She'd underestimated me. That evening, I told Dylan I needed to fly back to Chicago for urgent business. "But Emma's doing so well," he protested. "That's exactly why I can leave for a few days. She's out of danger, and you'll be here with her. I'll be back before you're discharged." Dylan looked hurt that I'd choose business over Emma's recovery, but he didn't argue. He had no idea I was actually flying back to destroy the woman who'd been stealing from his daughter's medical fund. The flight back to Chicago gave me time to plan. Sarah Mitchell had been sophisticated in her fraud, but she'd made the mistake of targeting someone with the resources and connections to fight back systematically. Detective Rodriguez met me at my office the next morning with a folder thick with evidence. "We've been building the case since you first called," he said. "Banking records, communication logs, background on her previous schemes. She's definitely been operating under multiple identities across several states. What do you need from me? Keep playing along until we can catch her in the act of actually requesting the additional funds. Once she provides bank routing information for the fake charges, we'll have her for wire fraud, which is a federal crime." I nodded. "And the money she's already stolen? We'll recover what we can. But, Mr. Blackwood, you should know that in cases like this, full restitution is rare. These people usually spend the money as quickly as they steal it." I smiled coldly. "Detective, I'm not worried about the money. I'm worried about making sure she never does this to another family." That afternoon, I responded to Sarah's email requesting the additional $100,000. "Of course," I wrote. "Emma's health is priceless. Please send the banking information for the additional costs." Her response came within an hour. Account numbers, routing information, detailed instructions for the wire transfer. Everything Detective Rodriguez needed to build an ironclad case for federal wire fraud. But I wasn't done yet. Using my new medical consulting company, I'd been tracking down Sarah's previous victims. 6 families across 4 states, all dealing with serious illnesses, all grateful for Sarah's help even though she'd been stealing from them. I started making phone calls. The first family was in Oregon. Their teenage son had needed experimental treatment for a rare neurological condition. Sarah had coordinated his care, charging them $15,000 in administrative fees that should have been covered by their insurance. The second family was in Arizona. Their elderly father had required specialized cancer treatment. Sarah had convinced them to pay for premium room accommodations that turned out to be standard care rebranded at twice the price. One by one, I contacted every family Sarah had defrauded. I explained who I was, what I'd discovered, and offered to help them recover their stolen money. Not out of my own pocket. They deserved to get their actual money back, but through legal action against Sarah and her network of accomplices. By the end of the week, I had 7 families ready to file a class action lawsuit against Sarah Mitchell, her various aliases, and anyone who'd helped her operate the fraud scheme. My lawyers were practically salivating. This wasn't just a financial crime anymore. This was a pattern of predatory behavior targeting families in medical crises. The kind of case that made careers and sent defendants to federal prison for decades. But I still wasn't done. Using resources that Detective Rodriguez couldn't legally access, I'd traced Sarah's current assets. She'd been careful about hiding money, but not careful enough. She had accounts in 3 different banks, a house in Seattle, and a new BMW that she'd paid for in cash. Everything she owned had been purchased with money stolen from families watching their loved ones fight for their lives. On Thursday morning, I flew back to Zurich. Emma was scheduled to be discharged on Friday, and I'd promised to be there. I found her sitting up in bed, coloring in a book, and chatting with Dylan about what she wanted to do when they got home. "Grandpa!" She threw her arms around me. "I missed you." "I missed you too, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Dr. Brennan says I'm winning the fight. The soldier cells are very good at their job." Dr. Brennan confirmed that Emma's blood work continued to improve dramatically. The modified cells were successfully eliminating the leukemia, and her body was responding perfectly to the treatment. "She'll need regular monitoring for the next year," he explained, "but I'm confident in saying that the treatment has been successful. Emma is going to be fine." Dylan cried again, but these were tears of relief and joy. Emma patted his hand like she was the adult and he was the child. "It's okay, Daddy. The soldier cells won. We can tell them thank you now." That night, we celebrated with room service champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Emma. She insisted on toasting the soldier cells and Grandpa's kindness and Daddy's love. It should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, I sat there knowing that someone was actively stealing from our family's crisis, turning Emma's recovery into a payday. But Sarah Mitchell had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was just another wealthy mark, too emotional and grateful to ask hard questions. She didn't know that I'd built an empire by being more ruthless than the people trying to cheat me, and she was about to learn exactly what that meant. The next morning, Sarah's additional costs email arrived. Extended observation, $50,000. Specialized follow-up care, $30,000. Transportation and accommodation adjustments, $20,000. $100,000 in additional costs that hadn't been mentioned in any of our previous discussions. I forwarded the email to Detective Rodriguez and then called my lawyer in Chicago. "Jim, I need you to do something for me. I want to buy a small medical consulting company in Los Angeles, the kind of business that provides patient advocacy and treatment coordination services. That's an unusual acquisition for Blackwood Capital. It's not for the company, it's personal." Within 6 hours, my lawyers had identified and made an offer on Mitchell Medical Advocates, a small firm that provided exactly the services Sarah.
I texted back, "Of course, processing payment tomorrow morning." Her response was immediate. "Perfect. Thank you for everything. Emma is so lucky to have you." Lucky, as if luck had anything to do with a 7-year-old girl fighting for her life. Friday morning, we checked out of the Institute for Pediatric Oncology. Emma was discharged with a clean bill of health and instructions for follow-up care with her oncologist in Seattle. Dr. Brennan shook my hand and told me I had a remarkable granddaughter. "She's a fighter," he said, "just like her grandfather, I suspect." If only he knew. The flight back to Seattle was triumphant. Emma was chatty and energetic, asking the flight crew endless questions about how airplanes worked. Dylan was relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since we'd arrived in Switzerland, and I was planning exactly how Sarah Mitchell's world was about to collapse. We landed at SeaTac Airport on Friday evening. Dylan's plan was to drive directly to his apartment and let Emma sleep in her own bed for the first time in weeks. I offered to get them a hotel room for the night, but Dylan insisted they wanted to go home. Besides, he said, Sarah's coming by tomorrow morning to help with the follow-up care coordination. It'll be easier to meet at the apartment. Perfect. Saturday morning, I arrived at Dylan's apartment building at exactly 10 a.m. I'd confirmed with Detective Rodriguez that everything was in place. Sarah Mitchell would be arrested the moment she attempted to collect payment for fraudulent medical charges. But first, I wanted to talk to her. Dylan lived in a modest two-bedroom place in Capitol Hill, the kind of neighborhood where young families could still afford rent. Emma was in her own room, unpacking Mr. Peanuts and a bag full of Swiss souvenirs when the buzzer rang. "That's Sarah," Dylan said, pressing the button to let her up. 3 minutes later, Sarah Mitchell knocked on the door. She looked exactly the same as she had at the hospital weeks ago. Professionally dressed, confident smile, briefcase full of documents. She had no idea her life was about to end. "Marcus," she said warmly, "so good to see you. And Emma looks wonderful. The treatment was obviously a complete success." "It was," I agreed, "thanks to your coordination." "My pleasure. Now, about the final payment arrangements." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a new set of documents. More bills, more charges, more reasons why I needed to wire her another $100,000. I let her go through the entire presentation: administrative fees, extended observation costs, specialized equipment rentals. All of it sounded official and necessary. All of it was fraud. When she finished, I nodded thoughtfully. "That all makes sense. I'll process the payment immediately." Sarah's smile widened. "Wonderful! I knew you'd understand the importance of completing the full treatment protocol." "Oh, I understand the importance of completion," I said. "Dylan, could you take Emma to her room for a few minutes? I need to discuss some financial details with Sarah." Dylan looked puzzled but complied. When I heard Emma's bedroom door close, I turned back to Sarah. "Before I make this payment, I have a few questions." "Of course. What would you like to know?" "I'd like to know why you think I'm stupid enough to wire $100,000 to a fraudulent account set up by an actress from Los Angeles." Sarah's smile didn't waver, but something changed behind her eyes. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Sarah M. Dalton. That's the name on the account where my original payment went, isn't it? Close enough to your real name to remember, different enough to provide deniability." Now the smile was gone. Sarah's hand moved slowly toward her briefcase. "I wouldn't," I said quietly, "because Detective Rodriguez is waiting in the hallway with a warrant for your arrest on federal wire fraud charges." Sarah froze. For a moment, the professional mask slipped completely, revealing the predator underneath. "You can't prove anything," she said. "Actually, I can prove everything. Banking records, communication logs, background checks on your previous victims. Did you think I got rich by not asking questions?" I stood up slowly, never taking my eyes off her. "But the evidence isn't what's going to destroy you, Sarah. What's going to destroy you is the fact that you picked the wrong family to steal from." "Dylan had nothing to do with this," she said quickly. "He's completely innocent." "I know. Which is the only reason you're going to be arrested instead of disappearing permanently." Sarah stared at me, finally understanding who she'd been dealing with. "You're threatening me." "I'm explaining reality. You stole money from families watching their children fight for their lives. You turned medical crises into personal profit. You made my son think he couldn't afford to save his daughter." I moved closer, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Sarah, I've spent 40 years learning how to destroy people more dangerous than you. The only question is whether you disappear into the federal prison system or into something much more permanent." Before she could respond, there was a knock on the door. Detective Rodriguez entered with 2 federal agents and a warrant.
Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and operating a criminal enterprise across state lines. As they handcuffed her, Sarah looked at me one last time. The families got their treatments. No one was hurt. My granddaughter almost died while you were stealing money from her medical fund. That's not no one hurt. That's attempted murder for profit. They led her away in handcuffs. Through the apartment window, I watched them put her in the back of an unmarked federal car and drive away. Dylan emerged from Emma's room, his face pale. "Dad, what just happened?" I sat down on his couch and explained everything. The fake account, the fraudulent charges, the previous victims, and the federal investigation. Dylan listened in stunned silence. "She was stealing from Emma's treatment fund?" he asked finally. "She was stealing from everyone's treatment fund. You, me, 6 other families. She's been operating this scam for years." Dylan sat down heavily in his chair. "I trusted her. I let her coordinate everything because I thought she was helping us. She was helping herself. And she was good at it. Good enough that I almost didn't catch on." "But you did catch on." I nodded. "Because I've been dealing with thieves and liars for 40 years. The only difference was that this time they were stealing from my family." Emma appeared in the doorway, clutching Mr. Peanuts. "Grandpa, why did those people take the nice lady away?" Dylan and I looked at each other. How do you explain criminal fraud to a 7-year-old? "The nice lady wasn't actually nice," I said. "She was taking money that was supposed to help sick children, so the police had to stop her." Emma considered this seriously. "That's not very nice at all." "No, sweetheart, it's not." "Will she say sorry?" "I don't think she knows how."
Emma nodded like this made perfect sense to her. "Some people forget how to be nice. Daddy says it's sad for them." Out of the mouths of babes. 3 months later, Sarah Mitchell pled guilty to 17 counts of wire fraud and was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The class action lawsuit recovered most of the stolen money, which was distributed back to the families she'd defrauded. Emma's 6-month follow-up showed no signs of cancer. Dr. Brennan, the real Dr. Brennan, confirmed that the treatment had been completely successful. She would need monitoring for several more years, but the prognosis was excellent. Dylan and I had dinner together every Sunday now, sometimes at my pet house, sometimes at his apartment, always with Emma asking endless questions about everything she saw. She was fascinated by the view from my 40th floor windows and convinced that I could see all the way to Switzerland from there. "Can you see the hospital where the soldier cells live?" she'd ask. "The soldier cells live in you now," I'd remind her. "They're keeping you healthy." "Oh, right, I forgot." One Sunday evening, as I was getting ready to leave Dylan's apartment, Emma handed me a drawing she'd made. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. The tallest figure wore a tie and had gray hair. The middle figure was labeled Daddy. The smallest figure had pigtails and was holding something that might have been Mr. Peanuts. "That's our family," Emma explained. "I drew you with fancy clothes because Daddy says you wear fancy clothes to work." "It's beautiful," I said, and meant it. "Can I hang this in my office?" "Yes! Then all your work friends can see our family." I looked at Dylan, who was smiling. "Your work friends might be surprised to learn you have a family." "Good," I said. "It's time they learned what actually matters." The next morning, I hung Emma's drawing in my office, right behind my desk, where everyone could see it. Some of my executives seemed surprised, but no one commented directly. Word spread quickly through the company that Marcus Blackwood had family pictures in his office now, and his demeanor in meetings had become noticeably less intimidating. I still worked hard. I still closed deals and built wealth and moved markets. But now I left the office at 5 o'clock on Fridays and spent weekends with my granddaughter instead of spreadsheets. Emma was thriving. Her hair had grown back thicker and curlier than before. She'd started first grade and was already reading at a 3rd grade level. Her teacher said she was brilliant, curious, and kind to everyone. Dylan was thriving too. The stress of Emma's illness had lifted, and he was dating again. A kindergarten teacher named Lisa, who Emma adored, and who seemed to genuinely care about both of them. As for me, I'd learned something valuable during those terrifying weeks when I thought I might lose my granddaughter before I'd really gotten to know her.
Money couldn't buy health or time or forgiveness, but it could buy justice. And sometimes, justice was the foundation that everything else was built on. Sarah Mitchell had thought she could exploit our family's crisis for her own gain. She'd underestimated the lengths I'd go to protect the people I loved. She'd learned too late that some towers rise only after everything else has fallen. And some men become most dangerous when they finally have something worth fighting for. Emma was cancer-free, Dylan and I were rebuilding our relationship one Sunday dinner at a time, and Sarah Mitchell was spending the next 12 years thinking about the mistake of targeting the wrong family. In the end, that felt like justice. But more importantly, it felt like family. And family, I'd finally learned, was the only empire worth building. 6 months after Sarah Mitchell's sentencing, I thought the worst was behind us. Emma was thriving in second grade, Dylan had proposed to Lisa, and I'd finally learned to leave the office before midnight. But on a cold February morning, everything changed again when my private investigator called with news that made my blood run cold. "Marcus, we have a problem," Carl Hendricks said without preamble. "Sarah Mitchell didn't work alone, and her partners are still out there." I was in my office reviewing acquisition reports when Carl's call came through. The view from the 40th floor showed Chicago wrapped in winter gray, but suddenly the city looked darker than usual. "What do you mean, partners?" "I've been tracking the money trail from Mitchell's operation, the fraudulent accounts, the fake medical coordination services, the falsified documents. It's too sophisticated for one person to have built alone." I set down my coffee and gave Carl my full attention. "How sophisticated?" "We're talking about a network that's been operating for at least 5 years across 12 states. Medical identity theft, insurance fraud, fake patient advocacy services. Mitchell was just the front-facing operative. Someone else was pulling the strings." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "Are you saying Emma's treatment was part of something bigger?" "I'm saying Mitchell's arrest might have saved your family, but it didn't shut down the operation. And Marcus, there's something else. I've been monitoring communication intercepts from the federal investigation. Someone's been asking questions about you." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest they know you're the reason Mitchell went down. The kind that suggest they might want payback." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the streets below where normal people were going about their normal lives, unaware that predators were circling families in medical crisis. Who's asking the questions? That's what I'm still trying to figure out. But Marcus, these people don't forgive and they don't forget. If they see you as a threat to their operation, they might decide to eliminate that threat. Let them try. I'm not talking about coming after you directly. I'm talking about going after Dylan and Emma. The words hit me like ice water. For all my wealth and power, my family was still vulnerable. Emma was a 7-year-old girl who'd survived cancer. Dylan was a single father trying to build a normal life. They couldn't defend themselves against professional criminals. "What do you need from me?" "Permission to dig deeper and resources to hire additional security for your family while I investigate." "Done. Whatever it costs." "Marcus, there's one more thing. The federal agents investigating Mitchell's network think there might be a leak in the Chicago Police Department. Someone who's been feeding information to the criminal organization about ongoing investigations." Detective Rodriguez, the man who'd helped me build the case against Sarah Mitchell. If there was a leak in the department, it could have compromised everything we'd worked for. Are you saying Rodriguez is dirty? I'm saying someone with access to federal law enforcement databases has been passing information to criminals. It might be Rodriguez, it might be someone else. But until we know for sure, we can't trust anyone in official law enforcement. After Carl hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the city and thinking about vulnerability. I had spent 40 years building walls of wealth and power around myself, but those walls meant nothing if the people I loved were exposed. I called my head of security, a former Navy SEAL named Harrison Blake, who'd been protecting high-value executives for 15 years. "Blake, I need a threat assessment and immediate protective detail for my son and granddaughter in Seattle." "What's the nature of the threat?" I filled him in on the Mitchell case and Carl's discoveries. Blake listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated why I paid him 7 figures a year to keep me alive. "This is sophisticated organized crime," Blake said when I finished. "Medical fraud networks often have connections to larger criminal enterprises. Money laundering, identity theft, sometimes human trafficking. If they see your family as a threat to their operation, they won't hesitate to use violence." "What do you recommend?" "Full protective detail for Dylan and Emma, starting immediately. Electronic surveillance countermeasures for their apartment and Emma's school. Background checks on everyone in their immediate circle. And Marcus, you need to consider relocating them." "Relocating them where?" "Somewhere these people can't find them, at least until we can identify and eliminate the threat." I closed my eyes. Emma had just started to feel safe again after months of medical uncertainty. Dylan was finally building a stable relationship with Lisa. Now I was supposed to uproot their lives again because of my decision to go after Sarah Mitchell? Do it. But Blake, I want them protected, not imprisoned. Emma goes to school, Dylan goes to work, they maintain as normal a life as possible. Understood. I'll have a team in Seattle tonight. That evening, I called Dylan to explain the situation. The conversation was one of the hardest I'd ever had. "Dad, are you saying Emma's in danger because of what happened with Sarah?"
I'm saying there might be people who see our family as a threat to their criminal operation. It's probably nothing, but I want to be careful."
"Probably nothing? You're sending bodyguards to protect my daughter based on probably nothing?" I could hear the anger building in Dylan's voice, the same anger that had driven us apart 7 years ago. "Dylan, these people make money off families in medical crisis. They steal from parents watching their children fight for their lives. If they think we might expose their operation, they could decide we're a problem that needs to be eliminated." The line was quiet for a long moment. Then, "How long?" "Until we know for sure there's no threat." "And if there is a threat?" "Then we deal with it." Another pause. "Emma won't understand why strange men are suddenly following her around." "Tell her they're friends of Grandpa's who want to make sure she stays safe. Tell her it's temporary." "Is it temporary?" I looked out my office window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. "Yes, one way or another, it's temporary." The next morning, Blake's team was in place. 3 operators with military backgrounds and experience in executive protection, all posing as maintenance workers, delivery drivers, and other invisible urban professionals. They maintained discreet surveillance of Dylan's apartment building, Emma's school, and the routes between. For the first week, nothing happened. Emma went to school, played with friends, and complained that the new friends of Grandpa's were boring because they never wanted to play games. Dylan went to work, came home, and tried to pretend that having professional killers watching his family was a normal part of life. I threw myself into work with the kind of intensity I hadn't felt in months, using Blackwood Capital's resources to conduct my own investigation into medical fraud networks. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The Mitchell operation was indeed part of something much larger, a nationwide network of fake patient advocates, corrupt medical billing companies, and fraudulent insurance claims processors. They targeted families dealing with expensive medical conditions, inserting themselves as helpful coordinators while systematically stealing from treatment funds. But it wasn't just theft. In some cases, they'd actively delayed or sabotaged legitimate treatments to create additional opportunities for fraud. Children had died while these parasites extracted profit from their families' desperation. The scope was staggering. Hundreds of families across dozens of states, millions of dollars in stolen funds, and a sophisticated infrastructure that included corrupt medical professionals, law enforcement contacts, and even judges who'd been bought to ensure favorable outcomes in legal disputes. Sarah Mitchell hadn't just been stealing from Emma's medical fund. She'd been part of an organization that was systematically destroying families already shattered by medical crisis. On Thursday of the second week, Blake called with an update that made my hands shake.
We've identified at least 3 individuals conducting surveillance of Dylan's workplace and Emma's school. Professional surveillance, not random criminals. They're mapping routines, identifying vulnerabilities, and documenting security measures. Are Dylan and Emma safe? For now. My team is maintaining overwatch, and the targets haven't made any aggressive moves. But Marcus, these people are professionals. They're conducting detailed reconnaissance for a reason. What kind of reason? Kidnapping, assassination, or leverage to force you to stop investigating their operation. The words hit me like a physical blow. Emma, my granddaughter who'd survived cancer and learned to trust that adults would protect her, was being watched by people who specialized in destroying families. I want them moved, tonight. Already arranged. Safe house in Portland, fully staffed security team, cover identities that will hold up under scrutiny. They'll be invisible until this is resolved. What about Dylan's job? Emma's school? Medical leave for Dylan due to Emma's ongoing cancer recovery, homeschooling for Emma with a tutor who has security clearance. It's not perfect, but it's safe. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine explaining to Emma why she couldn't go to school anymore, why she couldn't see her friends, why strange men with guns had to watch her play in the backyard of a house that wasn't her own. Do it. That night, I flew to Seattle to personally oversee the relocation. Dylan was furious, pacing his apartment like a caged animal, while Blake's team efficiently packed everything they'd need for an indefinite stay in protective custody. "This is insane," Dylan said for the 10th time. "We're running away from people who might not even be a real threat." The surveillance is real. The criminal organization is real. The fact that they're targeting our family is real. Because you couldn't leave well enough alone. Sarah Mitchell was in prison. Justice was served. But you had to keep digging. The accusation stung because it was partially true. I could have stopped after Mitchell's arrest. I could have accepted that one predator was off the streets and moved on with rebuilding my relationship with my family. But I kept investigating because I couldn't stand the thought of other families suffering what we had suffered. Because shutting down one fraud operation while leaving the larger network intact felt like winning a battle while losing the war. "You're right," I said quietly. "I could have stopped. Maybe I should have stopped. But I didn't. And now we have to deal with the consequences." Emma appeared in the doorway of her bedroom, clutching Mr. Peanuts and looking confused. "Daddy, why are we packing everything?" Dylan knelt down to her level, his expression softening. "We're going on a little vacation, sweetheart. Grandpa has a special house where we can stay for a while." "Is it because of the bad people?" The question hit both Dylan and me like a sledgehammer. Emma was 7 years old. She should have been worried about homework and playground drama, not bad people who might want to hurt her family. "There are no bad people," Dylan said gently. "Grandpa just wants to make sure we're extra safe while his friends figure some things out." "Grandpa, are you in trouble?" I knelt down beside Dylan, taking Emma's small hand in mine. "Sometimes when you try to help other people, it makes some bad people angry. But I promise you, sweetheart, nothing is going to happen to you or your daddy. I won't let it." "What about you?" "What about me?" "Will something happen to you?" I looked into my granddaughter's eyes and saw the same fear I'd carried as a child when my own father had faced business troubles that threatened our family. The fear that the people you loved might disappear without warning, leaving you alone in a world that suddenly felt dangerous and unpredictable. "Nothing is going to happen to me either," I said firmly. "We're all going to be fine." It was a promise I intended to keep, no matter what it cost. The safe house in Portland was a modest 2-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business and strangers stood out immediately. Blake's team had transformed it into a fortress while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Security cameras disguised as decorative lighting, reinforced doors that looked standard from the outside, bulletproof glass that seemed like regular windows. The yard was fenced and monitored,
with motion sensors hidden among garden decorations. For the first week, nothing happened. Emma went to school, played with friends, and complained if the new friends of Grandpa's were boring because they never wanted to play games. Dylan went to work, came home, and tried to pretend that having professional killers watching his family was a normal part of life. I threw myself into work with the kind of intensity I hadn't felt in months, using Blackwood Capital's resources to conduct my own investigation into medical fraud networks. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The Mitchell operation was indeed part of something much larger, a nationwide network of fake patient advocates, corrupt medical billing companies, and fraudulent insurance claims processors. They targeted families dealing with expensive medical conditions, inserting themselves as helpful coordinators while systematically stealing from treatment funds. But it wasn't just theft. In some cases, they'd actively delayed or sabotaged legitimate treatments to create additional opportunities for fraud. Children had died while these parasites extracted profit from their families' desperation. The scope was staggering. Hundreds of families across dozens of states, millions of dollars in stolen funds, and a sophisticated infrastructure that included corrupt medical professionals, law enforcement contacts, and even judges who'd been bought to ensure favorable outcomes in legal disputes. Sarah Mitchell hadn't just been stealing from Emma's medical fund. She'd been part of an organization that was systematically destroying families already shattered by medical crisis. On Thursday of the second week, Blake called with an update that made my hands shake. We've identified at least 3 individuals conducting surveillance of Dylan's workplace and Emma's school. Professional surveillance, not random criminals. They're mapping routines, identifying vulnerabilities, and documenting security measures. Are Dylan and Emma safe? For now, my team is maintaining overwatch, and the targets haven't made any aggressive moves. But Marcus, these people are professionals. They're conducting detailed reconnaissance for a reason. What kind of reason? Kidnapping, assassination, or leverage to force you to stop investigating their operation? The words hit me like a physical blow. Emma, my granddaughter who'd survived cancer and learned to...
Dylan studied my face in the lamplight. You've changed, Dad. Since Emma got sick, since we started talking again. You're different. Different how? Harder, more focused, like you finally found something worth fighting for. He was right. For 40 years, I'd built wealth and power for their own sake, accumulating success without any clear purpose beyond the accumulation itself. But watching Emma fight cancer, discovering Dylan's strength as a father, rebuilding the relationship I thought was permanently broken, had given me something I'd never had before. A reason to use my resources for something that actually mattered. I have found something worth fighting for, I said. You and Emma, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. The next morning brought troubling news from Carl Hendricks. He'd been tracking communications related to the medical fraud network and discovered that our relocation hadn't gone unnoticed. They know Dylan and Emma have disappeared, Carl reported during our secure phone call. They're asking questions, reaching out to contacts, trying to locate them. How did they find out so quickly? That's what worries me. Either they had surveillance we didn't detect, or they have access to information they shouldn't have access to. The leak? If someone in law enforcement was feeding information to the criminal network, they might know about the safe house, the security arrangements, even Blake's identity and background. Are we compromised? I don't know yet, but Marcus, I think it's time to go on the offensive. What do you mean? Instead of just protecting your family, we start hunting the people hunting them. We identify the leadership of the fraud network, gather evidence of their criminal activities, and eliminate them as a threat. Eliminate them how? Whatever way works. Carl's tone was matter-of-fact, but I understood the subtext. He wasn't just talking about legal prosecution anymore. He was talking about permanent solutions to permanent problems. Carl, I need to think about this. Don't think too long. Every day your family stays in hiding is another day these people have to find them. After Carl hung up, I sat in the safe house kitchen drinking coffee and thinking about lines I'd never imagined crossing. For 40 years, I'd operated within the boundaries of legal business practice, using money and influence to achieve my goals. But legal boundaries meant nothing to people who kidnapped children and murdered families for profit. Maybe it was time to fight fire with fire.
That afternoon, I took a walk around the safe house neighborhood with Blake, ostensibly for exercise, but actually to discuss options I couldn't voice inside a building that might be monitored. Blake, hypothetically, if someone wanted to permanently solve a problem involving organized criminals who target families, what would that look like? Blake glanced at me sideways. Hypothetically? Hypothetically. Hypothetically, it would require identifying the key players in the criminal organization, gathering intelligence on their locations and routines, and then systematically removing them from the equation. Removing them how? Accidents, disappearances, heart attacks, the kind of things that happen to people in high-stress criminal occupations. We walked in silence for a block, passing houses where normal families were living normal lives, unaware that two men were discussing assassination like a business strategy. How difficult would that be? Not very. Criminal organizations like this one rely on a small number of key players. Remove with leadership, and the network collapses. Remove the operational specialists, and they can't function. Remove the financial coordinators, and the money flow stops. And the risks? To you personally, minimal if it's done right. To your family, the risk decreases with each target eliminated because the organization becomes less capable of retaliation. I thought about Emma, safe in the house behind us, but unable to go to school or see her friends. I thought about Dylan, watching his daughter's childhood being stolen by people who profited from human suffering. I thought about the hundreds of other families these criminals had targeted and the children who died while predators delayed their treatments for profit. Blake, how quickly could you put together a team? For what purpose? Problem resolution. Blake stopped walking and looked me directly. Marcus, once we cross that line, there's no going back. You need to be absolutely certain this is what you want. I'm certain. Then I can have a team operational within 48 hours. That evening, I called Carl Hendricks with new instructions. Carl, I want you to identify every key player in the medical fraud network. Names, addresses, daily routines, security measures, everything. Planning something specific? Planning to end this. Marcus, are you sure about this? Once you start down this path, the path started when they put my granddaughter under surveillance. I'm just deciding how it ends. Carl was quiet for a moment. It'll take me a week to compile comprehensive intelligence packages on the primary targets. You have 3 days. Marcus, 3 days, Carl. These people made the mistake of threatening my family. Now they're going to learn what that costs. Over the next 3 days, I watched Emma adapt to her temporary prison with the resilience that continued to amaze me. She completed schoolwork with her assigned tutor, played games with the security team, and asked endless questions about why they couldn't go home yet. Dylan struggled more, spending hours staring out windows and pacing the house like a trapped animal. The enforced inactivity was wearing on him, and I could see the anger building behind his carefully controlled exterior. On Thursday morning, Carl delivered his intelligence packages. 5 primary targets, each responsible for different aspects of the medical fraud network's operations. Dr. Marcus Webb, a corrupt oncologist in Houston, who falsified diagnoses to justify expensive treatments that were never provided, while the kids died from diseases they'd never actually had. Eleanor Rodriguez, not related to the detective Rodriguez, who ran a fake patient advocacy service in Miami that specialized in insurance fraud. James Chan, who operated a network of fraudulent medical billing companies in Los Angeles. Sandra Mills, who coordinated money laundering operations through shell companies in Denver. And finally, David Reeves, who appeared to be the overall coordinator of the network, operating from a legitimate medical consulting firm in Phoenix. Each file contained detailed information: home addresses, work schedules, family members, financial assets, security measures, and vulnerabilities. Carl's work was thorough and professional, the kind of intelligence package that would allow Blake's team to eliminate all 5 targets within a week. "These are the people destroying families like yours," Carl said as I reviewed the files. "Webb alone has falsified diagnoses for over 200 children, collecting insurance payments for treatments that were never provided, while the kids died from diseases they'd never actually had." The scale of evil was breathtaking. Not just theft, but murder. Not just fraud, but the systematic destruction of families who trusted the medical system to save their children. I called Blake and authorized the operation. All 5 targets, minimum viable timeline, maximum operational security. I want them gone before they can retaliate against my family. Understood. We'll begin with the peripheral targets and work toward the center. Webb in Houston tomorrow night, Rodriguez in Miami Saturday morning, Chen in Los Angeles Saturday evening, Mills in Denver Sunday night, and Reeves in Phoenix Tuesday morning. And the collateral damage? None. These will look like natural deaths or accidents, heart attacks, car accidents, home invasions gone wrong, nothing that traces back to you or your family. And after it's done, the network collapses, your family comes home, and anyone else thinking about targeting medical families gets a very clear message about the consequences. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the safe house guest room thinking about the 5 people who would be dead within a week because I'd ordered their elimination. For 40 years, I'd competed ruthlessly in business, driving competitors into bankruptcy and destroying careers when necessary, but I'd never actually killed anyone. Now I was about to become responsible for 5 deaths. The thought should have bothered me more than it did, but every time I felt a flicker of doubt, I thought about Emma under surveillance by professional criminals. I thought about Dylan's fear for his daughter's safety. I thought about the hundreds of other families these criminals had targeted and the children who died while predators profited from their suffering. Some problems couldn't be solved with money or lawyers or civilized negotiation. Some problems required permanent solutions. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a secure message from Blake. Houston package delivered successfully. Natural causes, no complications. Dr. Marcus Webb, the man who'd falsified cancer diagnosis for over 200 children, was dead. 1 down, 5 to go. I deleted the message and went back to trying to sleep. Friday morning news reports of Dr. Webb's sudden death from an apparent heart attack. The local media described him as a respected oncologist who dedicated his life to treating children with cancer. If they only knew the truth. Saturday's news cycle included brief mentions of Elena Rodriguez's fatal car accident in Miami and James Chan's death during a home invasion in Los Angeles.
3 down, 2 to go. Dylan noticed my mood improving as the weekend progressed, though he attributed it to optimism about resolving the threat to our family rather than the systematic elimination of that threat. "You seem more relaxed," he observed Sunday evening as we watched Emma play a board game with one of Blake's operatives. "I think we're close to a resolution." "What kind of resolution?" "The kind that lets you and Emma go home safely." Sunday night, Sandra Mills died in her sleep in Denver, another apparent heart attack. The local news mentioned her work with medical billing companies, but didn't delve into the details of her fraudulent operations. Monday morning, I called Detective Rodriguez with a question that had been nagging at me. "Detective, when we were building the case against Sarah Mitchell, did you share information about our investigation with anyone else in the department?" "Of course. Cases like this require coordination with federal agencies, financial crimes units, organized crime task forces." "Why?" "I need a list of everyone who had access to information about my family's involvement in the investigation." "Mr. Blackwood, that's confidential law enforcement information. I can't just—" "Detective, my family is in protective custody because someone with access to law enforcement databases has been feeding information to the criminal network Mitchell worked for. Either you help me identify the leak, or I'll assume you are the leak." The line was quiet for a long moment. "I'll see what I can do." Tuesday morning, David Reeves died in Phoenix when his car inexplicably veered off a mountain highway and exploded on impact. The news described it as a tragic accident, possibly caused by mechanical failure or driver error. 5 for 5. Blake's team had performed flawlessly. That afternoon, Carl called with an update that made me smile for the first time in weeks. The network is collapsing. Without central coordination, the various fraud operations are falling apart. Local law enforcement is moving in to arrest lower-level operatives, but they're finding empty offices and abandoned operations. What about retaliation against my family? Can't retaliate when your leadership is dead and your organization is scattered to the wind. Marcus, you did it. The threat is neutralized. That evening, I gathered Dylan, Emma, and Blake in the safe house living room to share the good news. "You can go home," I announced simply. Emma jumped up from her coloring book. "Really? We can go back to our real house?" "Really." Dylan looked skeptical. "Just like that? The threat is gone? The people who were threatening us are no longer in a position to threaten anyone. What happened to them?" I looked at Blake, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "They encountered some unfortunate accidents." Dylan stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing the implications of what I wasn't saying directly. "Dad, what did you do?" "I protected my family." "How?" "However I had to."
The room was silent except for Emma's humming as she colored a picture of a house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it. Finally, Dylan spoke. "Are they dead?" "Yes." "All of them?" "The ones who mattered." Dylan sat back in his chair, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or respect. Possibly both. "I don't know whether to thank you or be terrified of you. Be grateful that you never have to find out what I'm capable of when my family is threatened." Emma looked up from her coloring. "Grandpa, does this mean the bad people can't hurt us anymore?" "That's exactly what it means, sweetheart." "Good. I want to go home and see my friends." 2 days later, we were back in Seattle. Dylan's apartment looked exactly the same, but everything felt different. Emma resumed school, Dylan returned to work, and I went back to Chicago with the knowledge that my family was safe because I'd been willing to cross lines I'd never imagined crossing. The official investigation into the medical fraud network quietly concluded with the arrests of several lower-level operatives. The newspapers described it as a successful multi-state operation that had shut down a sophisticated criminal enterprise. There was no mention of the 5 key figures who died from natural causes and accidents during the investigation. Detective Rodriguez never provided the list of people who had access to information about my family. A week after I'd returned to Chicago, I learned why. Rodriguez had died in his sleep, apparently from a heart attack brought on by job-related stress. Blake had been thorough in identifying and eliminating threats to my family. 3 months later, Emma's 1-year cancer-free anniversary came and went with a celebration that included cake, balloons, and a clean bill of health from her oncologist. She was thriving in school, had made new friends, and seemed to have completely moved past the disruption of our time in protective custody. Dylan had married Lisa in a small ceremony that I was honored to attend. They bought a house in a safe neighborhood with good schools and a yard where Emma could play without worrying about surveillance or threats. As for me, I'd learned something valuable during those terrifying weeks when professional criminals had targeted my family. Money and power meant nothing without the will to use them ruthlessly when necessary. I'd spent 40 years building an empire, but I'd never truly understood what that empire was for until I had to use it to protect the people I loved. The medical fraud network was gone, its leadership dead, its operations scattered to the wind. But there were other networks, other predators, other threats to families dealing with medical crises. And now they knew that some targets were more dangerous than they appeared. Word had spread through certain circles that Marcus Blackwood wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was someone who would kill to protect his family. Someone with the resources and connections to make problems disappear permanently. I found I liked that reputation. 6 months after the safe house, I established the Emma Blackwood Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to protecting families from medical fraud and providing financial assistance for legitimate experimental treatments. The foundation operated with military efficiency, aggressively investigating and exposing fraud while supporting families in genuine need. We helped 43 families in our first year, providing over $8 million in treatment funding and shutting down 6 fraudulent medical coordination services. The predators who survived the collapse of the main network learned to avoid families associated with the foundation. Emma remained unaware of the violence that had secured her safety. She knew that Grandpa had helped stop some bad people who were hurting families like theirs, but she didn't know about Blake's team or Carl's intelligence packages, where the 5 people who died to ensure her freedom. Dylan knew, and the knowledge had changed our relationship in subtle ways. There was a wariness in our interactions with me now, a recognition that my father was capable of things most people couldn't imagine. But there was also a deeper respect and a security that came from knowing I would literally kill to protect my family. 1 year after Sarah Mitchell's arrest, I received a letter forwarded through my lawyers. It was from Mitchell herself, writing from federal prison where she was serving her 12-year sentence. "Mr. Blackwood, I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did. The people I worked for were evil, and they deserved what happened to them. I was small time compared to what they were doing. I stole money, but they murdered children. Thank you for stopping them." I showed the letter to Dylan, who who read it with the same conflicted expression he'd worn since learning about my involvement in his family's protection. "Do you ever regret it? Killing those people?" I thought about the question seriously. 5 human beings were dead because I'd ordered their elimination. 5 families had lost fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. 5 lives had been extinguished to protect 3. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it." What if Emma finds out someday? What if she learns that her grandfather is a killer? Then I'll explain to her that sometimes good people have to do terrible things to protect the people they love, and I'll hope she never finds herself in a position where she has to make the same choice. Dylan nodded slowly. I hope so too. That evening I sat in my Chicago penthouse office, looking out at the city lights and thinking about legacy. I'd built a $2 billion company, employed thousands of people, and created financial instruments that moved global markets. But none of that would matter to Emma when she was old enough to understand it. What would matter was that when evil people had targeted her family, her grandfather was strong enough and ruthless enough to destroy them completely. What would matter was that she'd grown up safe and loved and free from the predators who fed on human suffering. Some towers rise only after everything else has fallen, and sometimes the most important foundation you can build is made from the bones of your enemies. Emma was safe, Dylan was happy, and the world had 5 fewer monsters in it. That felt like a legacy worth leaving. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.